My name is Andrew McCann. I am from Cape Cod. I'm an Eagle Scout from Falmouth. This presentation was initially going to be a lot larger, but for the interest in time and my sanity here on my days off, I decided just to keep this presentation to the lettered shoulder patches for the Cape. This collection came out of finishing my collection of council shoulder insignia, the shoulder CSPs, and trying to figure out something else to collect. And we came into community strips, red and white strips. I know a lot of you guys here tonight are in scouting longer than I've been. My first shoulder patch was the Cape Cod Council or Cape Cod and Islands Council S1. But that was in the late 90s. So I didn't grow up with these. This is something that I came into later. So, what is Cape Cod? Cape Cod is a peninsula off the southeastern coast or southeastern shore of Massachusetts. And the two islands are located off the southern shore of Cape Cod. So we're going to start with the council strips. The half strip, significantly older. This is probably one of the rarest patches in the entire collection. The tan strip on the left. I've only seen it once, and it's older. And the khaki and red is can be found in a couple different variations of the color of khaki, and it's probably one of the more easier patches to find for of the two, I guess. But the full strip is probably one of the easiest patches in this entire collection to find. It can be found in rough and medium twill. Yeah. So for the community strips, this was a little bit more difficult to encompass. Here's a brief overview of the history of scouting in the area. I'm not going to bore you guys with this, but for our sake, we just need to learn about which towns to collect. Obviously you have Barnstable County, you have Dukes County, which is Martha's Vineyard and the Elizabeth Islands, and then you have the island of Nantucket. But if you look, this is a map from one of the council booklets from 1928, and it includes towns off Cape and all the towns further off, Bridgewater, Plimpton, Kingston, Duxbury. All these towns were potentially slated to join the Cape Cod Council at the time. So that's where we come to, what towns to include. Obviously, you include all the main towns on the peninsula itself, P-Town to Falmouth. You also include, the town of Nantucket on the island of Nantucket. You can also include the different towns on Martha's Vineyard, Edgartown, Oak Bluffs, Vineyard Haven. But, if you're a completionist, do you include Carver, Plymouth, Middleborough, Marion, and Wareham? That is a question. If we're just collecting Cape Cod Council, then no, because, well, I guess yes, but that would probably just be the tan and reds. But if you're just including any strips from these locations, well, if you're going to collect Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, you also have to include the Cachalot Council strips. But I personally don't collect those other strips simply because, Cape Cod Islands. That's my main focus of collecting. So we're going to start with Martha's Vineyard. The vineyard itself, the island itself, can be found along with two of the major towns on the vineyard, Vineyard Haven and Edgartown. Edgartown, the tan and red, is significantly older than your red and whites. Now, also for Nantucket, I've only been able to find just the red and white half strip. Now on the Cape, And for Cape Cod Council, the system, like the red and white community strips, lasted a lot longer than it did in other places. The 1970, the CSP came into fashion, but the red and whites continued to be used on the Cape well into the 80s. So that's why for what we're going to see here later, a lot of these locations you can find in red and whites despite having pretty small towns and pretty small scouting populations. So next, we're going to go to the Upper Cape District. These arrowmen from Lodge 393 are longingly pointing out a Brewster patch, but as we'll come to find out, I'd longingly point at some of the other patches that we're going to see here tonight because the Brewster patch is one of the more easier ones to find. So we're going to start with Provincetown and Truro. Provincetown has had a pretty long history of scouting. It's one of the first towns to have, a scouting organization on the Cape, dating back to 1916. And, their program, pretty extensive. They had a Sea Scout troop or a Sea Scout unit. And, they continue to have scouting, even today. The Truro strip is probably one of the harder ones to find. It's only been, I've personally seen it a few times, but these ones, if you're just doing a complete, one of each town, the Truro strip is going to be your harder strip to find. Now, further south on the Cape, you got Wellfleet. Also, I'm not even going to bother telling you guys how rare these patches are. This is a small place, small council, and these are all pretty hard to find. But if you look long enough, you will find them. Wellfleet can be found in red and white, and with the tan and red, and Eastham can be found in the red and white and the khaki and red. Moving on to Chatham. Chatham's pretty interesting. They've had scouting for just as long as any of the other towns, if not longer. But one of the interesting things is Chatham is also the name of communities well across the country. So I haven't been able to completely verify whether or not these scouting strips were used on the Cape in Chatham, but I have been able to verify, the Chatham red and white was used. It's just interesting to find the other half strips from the other programs from the Cape or from Chatham itself. But a mystery. The Chatham station, I haven't been able to find one. I haven't been able to find any pictures of scouts wearing it. But according to people who are much more versed in Coast Guard lore, the Chatham station strip is associated with the Coast Guard station that is located in Chatham on the southeast tip. But we're not able to determine whether or not this is actually from the town, but could be. Now, Brewster, it's pretty interesting. Another town, much like Chatham, is the name of town in other communities throughout the U.S., and it can be found in multiple different colors from the different programs. For Harwich and Orleans, these are all from the towns. Also, Harwich is a smaller town with a smaller population, but they did have the Explorer post, and the Orleans ones are relatively easier to find. Obviously, the blue and white half strip is pretty hard to find. For Dennis is also another interesting one. All of these were used in the town for the different troops that were there. This is actually one of the smaller towns on the Cape, but it's interesting to find community strips from all of the villages that are within the town of Dennis. So we're moving to the Upper Cape District. Now, this map is on display at the Camp Greeno Museum in Yarmouth on the Cape. This image was provided to me by my scoutmaster, Ken Heisler. This map shows all of the community strips in the red and white form that were used in the 60s on the Cape. We'll get into some of the nuances of this map, but this is probably the holy grail of strips for the Cape. So starting with Yarmouth, this is the first instance of, I think that one of the more harder strips to find here is the Yarmouth strip itself for the Cape, because these other villages, South Yarmouth, Yarmouthport, West Yarmouth, these are much larger villages than the actual village of Yarmouth where the scout troops were. So you actually find these other three villages more than you actually find Yarmouth, the name of the town itself. Like Yarmouthport and West Yarmouth, much easier to find than the Yarmouth red and white. And I haven't been able to find any of these other patches in any other programs. So for Barnstable, I had to break this into two slides because there's just so many strips from this town. We'll start with Centerville. You can find it in a number of different programs, but in the bottom right, you'll see I'll call it the incorrect spelling of the town name with the RE instead of ER. But if we go back to this slide here, we actually see for the bottom right, Troop 54, Centerville, the name is actually spelled incorrectly on the red and white strip. So, if you want to collect red and white strips that are associated with the council itself, well, I've included that strip here, both in the blue and yellow and the red and white, but the correct spelling of the name, ER for Centerville. Cotuit and Osterville, both smaller villages, but you are able to find the community strips for these villages. Now, this particular slide shows probably two of the most rare patches on the Cape. So you have the village of Barnstable and you have the village of Hyannis. Hyannis is very much the hub of the Cape. It's the largest town without being a town on the Cape. It had the most number of scout troops for any given village. So you can find the community strip in a plethora of different programs. I wasn't able to get images for any of the other ones I could find. But for the actual village of Barnstable, this is probably one of the rarest patches to find if you're trying to go for a complete name set of all the towns. Likewise for the khaki and red, because the village of Barnstable is significantly smaller. It has a population of about 2,000 now. And back when these patches were used by the scouts, the village was significantly smaller. I'd argue that the West Barnstable strip is easier to find than the Barnstable patch itself. So moving to Falmouth, this is where I grew up. The Falmouth strip can be found in a bunch of different programs, and of course, the other villages are in the red and white strip. I have seen a Woods Hole strip in the blue and yellow half strip, but I was not able to get permission to use that image here. So for Bourne, this is another interesting one. Some people are purists. Some people say parts of Bourne aren't on the Cape, because they're on the other side of the canal that separates the peninsula of the Cape from the mainland. Buzzards Bay, it's technically it is a part of the town of Barnstable or town of Bourne, so we're going to include it. These are all pretty rare, but the Sagamore strip is fairly easy to find. For Sandwich, great name. The Sandwich Strip is you are able to find it in the red and white and khaki and red. Um, and probably the second rarest patch here is the Forestdale strip. This is the only time I have ever seen the Forestdale strip. Forestdale is a village within the town of Sandwich, and that image of the map from Camp Greeno is the first time I've ever actually seen this community strip. So it's definitely one of the more harder to find of the entire set. But if you're just doing a town set, you don't necessarily need to look for it. I'm looking for one because I'm looking for all of them. So for the last town, we have Mashpee, and this is it's a smaller town, smaller population, and this is the only strip I was able to find for Mashpee. It's red and white. So moving on to the base, it's currently now Joint Base Cape Cod, but the U.S. Coast Guard Air Station, you are able to find this patch in two different versions, one with twill going to the left and twill going to the right. It's pretty good patch. And it is, you can find it, but it's one of the more scarce one, I guess. And then for Otis itself, you have Otis Air Force Base in the red and white, and the OAFB is associated with Otis, but I haven't been able to find any uniforms or pictures with OAFB being used. And so the blue on blue Air Scout Otis AFB does exist. I just haven't been able to find one to actually put on here. But you can find reproductions on eBay right now. I'm just not going to touch them because they are fakes. And one more patch for you guys tonight, or neckerchief, I guess. This neckerchief is from a unit at Otis. So if an Otis Air Force Base red and white strip exists, does an Otis Air National Guard base exist? I haven't been able to find one, but I don't know. Maybe I'll find one someday. And that is the conclusion to my rather short presentation. On the CSI guide, they're listed as 10s. So they're listed as incredibly rare. I've seen the khaki and reds probably 4 or 5 times versus the tan and red I think I've seen once.
Andrew, for us Southerners, you spoke of a village in a town.
Yep.
Near the end. Explain the differences, please.
All right. So within you have, let me see if I have a map. So each town, the town of Barnstable, it's the main town. It's the seat of government for the county. Inside the town of Barnstable, it's comprised of villages. So the village of Barnstable, the village of Centerville, the village of Cotuit, the village of Osterville, the village of Hyannis, the village of West Barnstable. It's just another division of the town itself. So the town I grew up in, Falmouth, you have the village of Falmouth, T-Ticket, North Falmouth, West Falmouth, Woods Hole, Hatchville. I'm not sure if that's considered a village or not, but it's just another smaller division of the town itself.
If I could just add something to it, everything you said is correct, but I think if I added to it, I'd say that it's a unique pretty much to New England, maybe in New York, sometimes in Pennsylvania, but it's the Northeast. You don't see it every place. The primary distinction is the town is the government for all the villages. But some of the villages, like in New Hampshire, can have water precincts or fire precincts separate from the town's precincts, if that helps.